Street Fighter is a fighting game series I've wanted to like for many years, but every time I've attempted to get into the franchise over the past decade or so has been unsuccessful. Coming from a background of Mortal Kombat, Budokai Tenkaichi, and Soul Calibur hadn't given me a load of transferable skills for this storied series. There's just something about the game flow and feel of Street Fighter that never meshed well with me, but considering how well loved this series has been since its second sojourn, I want to give it another chance. You're watching Rayl Deal Games, and today I'll be playing Street Fighter 2 World Warrior completely guideless, and when I say guideless, I mean it. I didn't look up anything online while playing this game and taught myself how to do everything through trial, error, and iteration. By the end of my time with the game, I managed to conquer the challenge of this arcade-era masterpiece with all 8 characters and got good at this 34-year-old game. Now I'm defining getting good in the Souls community fashion, that is, as the refusal by the player to submit to the struggle a game presents, no matter how overwhelming the challenge may seem. And my, oh my friends, did Street Fighter 2 put me through the ringer time and time again. I make new gaming videos every single Friday, and if you like this video, you'll want to subscribe because I plan to cover every single version of the mainline Street Fighter games. Ringing the notification bell is the only way to make sure you don't miss another gaming creation from your boy, Rayl. With all of that established, let's talk about the rules I made for myself to make my time with SF2 even more accurate to the classic arcade experience. Starting out, I chose my order of character playthroughs based on each character's design and anything else I knew about the character going into this game. Ryu is the only character that looks bland, and since I know Shotas are the easier characters to learn, he's going to be my first pick. Ken rounds out my playthrough lineup because I love playing him in Smash Ultimate, so almost by default, he was bound to be my favorite character from a surface level understanding. I'll be playing Zangief second to last because I know he's got command grabs, and I love large grapple style characters in fighting games. I know Dhalsim has long limb style moves because of the Star Bomb Street Fighter 2 rap from like 10 years ago, so he landed later on my list too, and since I know from watching Third Strike tournaments that Chun Li is typically quite good in these games, she lands in the middle-ish of my order. Honda and Blanka are the two SF2 characters I knew about from an extremely young age because I had a basketball-style moveset card for each of them when I was younger. I wish I still had those, but I have no idea what happened to them. Guile is going to be my second character because I find his design to be a bit more bland than the other characters on the roster. Now, just playing through the game 8 times wasn't good enough for me because I'm a bit of a history buff. I like to take a look at old games and try to figure out why people fell in love with them the way that they did when they were new. And I wanted to do that with this game too. Now, I'll never be able to truly replicate the arcade experience given the fact that there isn't one near me at all, but I created a system of sort for recreating the single player aspects of it. To this end, I'll be limiting myself at first to $5 clears, that is, forcing myself to restart if it would have cost me more than $5 to keep playing. This translates to 10 total tries in each particular playthrough, and each set of $5 equals 1 week of playtime in this hypothetical historical analysis of SF2. I chose these values because I've heard Maximilian Dude discuss the way he'd scrounge around for $5 worth of quarters each week so that he could play in the arcades when he was younger. I know this is not an empirical data set for what it would be like to grow up in the 90s, but it is a good enough baseline to understand the process kids back in the day had to go through to learn the game. Because I have extremely limited time in my production schedule, I am giving myself an out in this challenge. If I ever, so to say, spend $50 on any one particular character, I'm going to say this is the point where I opened a lemonade stand in the hot summer sun to provide myself with more attempts. At the end of this playthrough, I'm going to compare the amount of money I would have spent on SF2 to how much it would have cost to buy an SNES and a copy of the game to see which process of play would have been more economical. I think we all know how this is going to turn out, but I figured it would be a good bit of fun to see how that lines up for every arcade game I review. So with my personal rules and character order established, let's dive right in with Ryu. Okay, so you know when you play your first Souls game and you come across that boss that rocks you right into the dirt over and over again, so much so that you're not sure if you're ever going to beat it? Playing Street Fighter II World Warrior for the first proper time with Ryu was like that for me, and it reminded me of when I was confronted by the experience of fighting the Blueberry Demon and Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. There were several times during my Ryu playthrough where I got blocked by an enemy or a boss so many times that I had to restart from the beginning. Dhalsim, being my first round opponent most of the time, never gave me any issue, but starting out, Chun Li was my first hurdle. I'm a big fan of the way Capcom positioned Chun Li in this arcade lineup, as she really forces the player to learn their footsie fundamentals early on. Chun has amazing normals and air maneuverability alongside insane burst damage potential. This forced me to get a better understanding of how Ryu's kicks and specials played against an opponent with a full toolkit at their disposal. I learned extremely early on about the way special moves in Street Fighter are different based on which face button is used to execute it. Learning this allowed me to stagger my Hadoukens in ways that put better pressure on my opponents regardless of the range they were at, and different levels of Shoryuken comboed better with certain opening moves than others. For example, a jumping LK or low kick leads really nicely into 2 to 3 crouching low kicks into either a Tatsumaki or any other special move. Now I'm sure this combo is not a true one, but the AI, which absolutely cheats, let me get away with it roughly half the time. Close-up heavy punches lead right into a heavier mid-powered Shoryuken, crouching medium kick is a great poke tool, and by the time I was finished with Ryu, it became one of my favorite moves in his kit. After besting Chun Li, Zangief followed up, and this guy was never all too difficult. He seemed to have particular difficulty with the crouching medium kick. Up close, he's an absolute terror because of how good he is at grabbing. The real challenge following Chun was Ken though. Being the other Shota of the game, I thought Ken and I would have comparable skill sets, and I'd be able to learn how to play Ryu by fighting him. In some ways this was true, but it became clear quite quickly that Ken is a bit better than Ryu. Now I don't know if this is objectively true or not, but when I juxtaposed my Ryu playthrough and my Ken one, Ken was much easier to win with. Some of this definitely comes down to the fact that Ryu is my first character, but there's gotta be something to this. Let me know in the comments below if I'm on the right track in my thinking here. The first time I managed to beat Ken, he'd eaten up most of my quarters, so I wiped on Honda, even though Honda is not that difficult at all. My first time meeting him didn't leave me with that impression though, as he managed to do 80% damage in one single attack. Once I made it back to him, I learned that fight easily though. Guile. Oh man, Guile, my dudes. He's the terror of this game. I'm not fudging the numbers when I say this guy munched through a grand total of 20 of my imaginary quarters and wiped out 5 whole runs. I even encountered this weird thing on my 7th and 8th attempts to beat this game where the order of the fights completely changed, putting me against Guile earlier, and my first time beating him was during my second match in an arcade tower attempt. Guile is absolutely unfair and busted. 2 sonic booms, which he can activate while walking forward, causes an instant dizzy, allowing him to wipe out an additional 25% of my health bar each time. He can't be jumped in on since he can do his air spin kick thing from a standing position, meaning you never know if he's got one of those in the tank or not. With fast projectiles, god tier normals, with great frames, long reach and speed, and this insane defense potential, Guile is one of 2 enemies that became the bane of my existence throughout my entire experience with this game. You're going to be hearing a lot about him over the course of this video. My favorite thing about Guile, and yes, I'm being sarcastic, is how he's able to beat nearly every move Ryu can do after I'm already in the early frames of the attack. For a while there, I thought I could only fight him with standing heavy kicks because that's the only thing that seemed to work, and this had to be done at the exact furthest possible distance to ensure he couldn't just grab me out of it or interrupt it with a punch or crouching heavy kick. That grab too is a major problem since it seems like he's able to do it even when he's not touching my character. Apparently his grab, and no one else's except the other problematic character in this game, reaches further than every other fighter's on the roster. And yeah, I could have just looked up how to exploit his AI, what moves he's weak to, and which combos are best with Ryu, but to me, it's far more fun to figure all of that stuff out on my own. By the end of my time with Ryu, I learned that standing heavy punch, low heavy kick, low medium kick, jumping heavy kick at exact footsie range, and Tatsumakis in very specific situations are all useful against him. When I would come across him with future characters, I'd spend time experimenting with their normals to find the 1 or 2 attacks that seemed to actually play well with his god tier assortment of supremely cracked attacks. I love that feeling of coming across enemies like Guile and being able to see how you're improving in the game. For me, this showed up with the way I started getting through Chun and Ken much more quickly and and reliably and how I could actually score a win against Guile periodically. When I encountered Guile in the second round instead of the sixth round in that weird arcade tower lineup switch up I mentioned before, I did manage to trounce the rest of the base cast, as no one else is really a challenge in comparison. I thought I was going to go up against Bison or Akuma, since I know they are like the big bosses of these earlier Street Fighter titles, but I was surprised to see these 3 sub-bosses pop up. Since I was running low on quarters, I was a little frustrated to learn how far from the end I really was, and I suppose that's how people would have felt back in the arcades too, which is the whole reason I'm playing this way in the first place. Mercifully, Balrog is one of the easiest encounters in the entire game. All it takes is getting an early life lead and then camping the corner until the timer runs out. Vega, on the other hand, is something else entirely. This boss made me exceed the $50 maximum I set for myself for the challenge, so from here on out, I'll just be keeping track of how much each character costs to complete without restarting the arcade tower after $5 have been spent. I wish I could have kept playing with the challenge in place, but it just wasn't feasible considering the number of games I need to play and videos I need to make this year. With a lucky grab after several attempts, I put Vega down. Sagat follows him up, and while this guy does have some monster damage dealing capabilities, he's actually not too bad. He does the Shota things, as he's got a dragon punch and a fireball, but he's actually extremely easy to dizzy with repeated crouching low kicks. I remember watching some Watch Mojo video or something like that 10 years or so ago that was talking about hard fighting game bosses, and one of the bosses they really hyped up was Bison from Street Fighter 2. Now, I don't remember if it was exactly World Warrior that they were talking about, and I'm going to guess it wasn't, because Bison in this game is an absolute pushover. He's easier than Vega for sure, and in comparison to Guile, he's chump change. And I do mean that kind of literally, since he only ever cost me a handful of quarters over the course of my entire playthrough of this game with every single character. One of my favorite things about Mortal Kombat as a series is the character-specific arcade endings, and I was hoping that this game would have them. Ryu's isn't anything too special, as he just wins the tournament and goes off in search of more battles, but it does add a further detail to his characterization if nothing else. At the end of my time with Ryu, he'd cost me $52.50, which translates to 11 weeks of going to the arcades. This is why arcades were so expensive, as that $52 translates to 5.5 hours of total playtime. And we're just getting started. You know how I said Guile is busted? Well, I learned extremely quickly how true that actually is when I started playing Guile myself. For reference, it took me $7.50 worth of matches to finish the arcade tower with Guile on my first attempt, which is comparable to what it cost me during my 10th attempt with Ryu. Now, I am getting better at the game, that's a fact. Enemies aren't trapping me the same way they used to when I was still brand new at the game, but the disparity between runs here is incredible. Sonic Boom is possibly the best special move in the game. I'm sure it'll be easy for those of you watching the video to just quickly look that up, but since I still want to know as few objective truths about these SF2 games as possible, I'm not doing that. Zangief couldn't even jump it because of how large his hitbox is, and even when Zangief or any other character started to close the distance between them and me, Guile's jumping heavy kick reaches a fifth of the way across the playable space. On top of this, it comes out extremely fast and doesn't seem to have much recovery, as the opponent doesn't seem to be able to punish it even on block. This is not to mention how fast and useful his crouching medium kick is at creating some great zoning pressure in neutral. It was with Guile that I learned the best way for most characters to fight back against Vega's insane moveset. By neutral jumping and hitting a high kick in the air, most characters can beat Vega pretty easily. There are a few that this trick doesn't work with, but with those characters there are others that work somewhat as well. Fighting Vega is honestly the worst part of this game, and I hope he either gets nerfed in future titles, or something like that. I'm pretty tired of fighting him after this game, and I am not excited at the prospect of needing to do it at least 30 or 40 more times throughout the rest of the SF2 games. One of Guile's most useful attacks is his standing light punch, as it can be comboed into his medium punch or just spammed for multiple hits. Look at what I do to Sagat in one of our matches. Did you see the way this extremely simple combo just dizzied him? This is how I beat Bison too, and I assume that if there were an opportunity to either block or otherwise escape the string, the AI would be able to do it. As we'll see later, they're very good at punishing certain moves other characters have that don't look like they should be counterable in the way that they are. Something that makes World Warrior the most successful Street Fighter game for getting me into the series is its simplified move list. Each character only has somewhere between 1 to 3 specials, and it makes learning the character much easier for a first-time player. Honda's 100-hand slaps is even especially easy to do, since it only requires the player to mash one of their punch-based attacks, and the damage this move does is incredibly insane. A good one of these can deal, no joke, 60 to 80% of the opponent's health bar, and it's the move I use to get through some of the more difficult fights in the game. The challenge is getting close to the enemy through their barrage of projectiles and other keep-away tactics. Sometimes when the AI would block the first hit in the string, they'd immediately counter-hit to knock me out of it. This didn't happen all too often though, so it makes me think there are only incredibly specific instances when this sort of thing can happen. Weirdly enough, my arcade ladder for Honda was different from the standard Dhalsim into Chun into Zangief lineup. This time I started on Chun, with Blanka and Zangief following up. This put me against Guile even earlier than typical, as he became my 4th opponent. I actually prefer this ladder, as the earlier his fight is, the easier it is to get through. Guile has such great zoning tools that it is incredibly difficult to get in close with Honda. It's possible he could have hit backwards a few times in here, but somehow Guile is able to walk forward while also charging Sonic Boom. He definitely didn't hold back for the same amount of time the player is required to pull off the same move. It was only by the luckiest slap I was able to finally beat Guile, and at the end of our fight, I would have a pixel of health left. This playthrough with Honda is the only one where I dropped around against Dhalsim. I've actually been super confused with his fighting style design this whole time while playing because he is literally so easy. I didn't lose the match against him, just one single round. Is he just the worst character in the game, or is the AI not programmed to play him that well? Balrog literally couldn't do anything against 100-hand slap, but Vega, once again, was an absolute terror for me. Standing heavy punch is the only way I managed to anti-air him, and it's what I used to finish him off. Bison was a menace for my Honda. His spinning kick move was something I hardly remembered he could use after beating him with Ryu and Guile, and gun to my head, I wouldn't be able to say anything about him if asked after my first 2 playthroughs. He just wasn't hard. This time though, everything changed. Because of how chonky Honda is, Bison's flip kick attack hits twice, and even when the high hit is blocked, the low immediately would clip my ankle and hit. Because he can immediately activate this attack again, he was able to just spin 2 to 3 times in a row, causing a dizzy every single time. On top of this, I couldn't manage his spinning, flying punch and stomp attacks. Worse still than all of this is his flaming tornado dash, as he's able to combo out of that with a command grab, which does 50% and is spammable. Through trial and error, I learned this move could be countered with a crouching light punch, and I beat him by scripting him into spamming the attack over and over again. Honda cost me $10.50 in quarters, which wasn't all too bad. While Honda celebrated by dining with his students on some nice steamy rice, I prepared myself for Blanka. When I was super young, I wanted to play Street Fighter 2. I grew up in the early 2000s, but I had these 2 baseball card-like things for Blanka and Honda, as I mentioned back in the intro. One of the things I remembered most about these cards is the sprite work of what a fighter looks like when exposed to Blanka's electricity. Going into this playthrough, I was hyped to give the memory of my childhood self what he imagined while leafing between those 2 folded old cardboard dreams. In the corner, his shocking flex is actually quite useful, and some enemies, such as Ryu and Ken, couldn't actually do anything if they were pinned close enough to the edge of the arena. Most of the time, they would try to shoot out a Hadouken only to get it electrified immediately. By being super aggressive, I managed to beat Guile, although this is not to say he was easy. He still cost me to dump more quarters than any other fighter in the game. Vega gave me the least trouble with Blanka than any of my other runs through this game. His jumping heavy kick does so much work against Vega, and the boss literally couldn't do anything against it because of the angle at which it comes out. Interestingly enough, Blanka's electricity counters Bison's flame dash, and I liberally used this move to dominate him. The reward for finishing the game with Blanka gave me some serious whiplash though, as this wild beast, lightning lashing fighter is apparently the lost boy Jimmy? You know, I always thought Idol's ending from Killer Instinct was super weird, but if there's one thing cool about Blanka's ending, it's the way it made me appreciate Idol's more. It's clear Rare's developers were poking some major fun at this green-skinned Brazilian ball. Costing me $7.50, Blanka was one of the easiest characters to get through the arcade tower with, and this is entirely because of how his electricity and flying ball attacks played against the toolkits available to the rest of the characters on the cast. I wouldn't be shocked if Blanka was a bit lower on the PvP tier list though, as everything he did seemed like it would be easy to work around for a human player. Since I've been playing this game Guideless and World Warrior doesn't have a training mode, there's a lot of small things about the combat system within this game I definitely hadn't mastered by this point in my playthrough. The best example I can give is that I didn't know how to do throws until my playthrough with Chun Li. Pressing a medium or heavy punch plus toward while next to the opponent causes a throw, and throws deal pretty substantial damage in this game. Chun Li is also able to do a mid-air throw, which may be something everybody in this game can do, but I wouldn't know for certain. There are a couple that definitely can do this, like Guile, Vega, and a few others, so I wouldn't be surprised to hear that this is a universal mechanic. Chun Li is cracked, and I am going to guess that she is second only to Guile in pro level tier lists. In general, the mash specials do ridiculous damage in this game, and they are what I use to roll credits with both Honda and Blanka. It attests to Chun Li's set of normals that I didn't really need to use her multi-kick special to get her ending. In fact, all I needed were her normals. Alongside Guile, she's the only character where I can say this is true, where I can say that they don't need specials at all. Jumping heavy punch into light kick into multi-kick is a crazy great combo, and it was one of the first ones I tried out. I would have likely finished Chun Li's campaign with a few less losses, but because of how insanely good she is, I started experimenting and messing around with some of her other moves. For example, I lost to Zangief once because I was trying to use spinning kick, but couldn't get it to come out right. Chun also has this Goomba air stomp attack, which is crazy satisfying to use, and I destroyed Honda with it because his large hitbox allowed me to hit him multiple times with one single activation. Guile still gave me some trouble, but at this point, what's new about that? That's the one consistency of World Warrior. Crouching medium kick did some great work against him, and Goomba stomping his stupid face brought me some pleasure, even if it wasn't the most efficient or safest way of dealing damage. Bison really wasn't too difficult with Chun because she's literally a god in the sky, even better at aerial combat than Vega. I'd like to think her ending is the canon one of World Warrior, as it provides a great window into her characterization and life. Guile's also shows off his connection to his family, but Chun's really shows how much of her life revolved around her quest for vengeance. Mortal Kombat has always been the fighting game franchise from the 90s, loaded with story-rich and lore-dense worlds and characters, but I'm hoping that the rest of the Street Fighter games from this decade have endings that match the quality of this one, Guile's, and a few others. Beating the game with Chun Li took me $8, but like I said above, it would have been a little less if I wasn't messing around so much in the pre-Guile matches. She's just so fun to play, and well, I needed a good time with this game with what I was about to deal with next. Dhalsim is hands down the worst character in the entire game, from a new player PvE exclusive perspective. He sucks. To be honest, I wasn't too surprised because of how easy he is to dunk on with every other character on the cast. It's a shame because, as I said at the top, I ordered my playthroughs of this game based on which ones I was least excited to play to those I was most intrigued by. Dhalsim is so late in my order because I really liked the idea of being able to zone my opponents with long-reaching limbs. Little did I know at the time that Dhalsim's most unique feature is also his chiefest liability. Every single attack is a liability, and I'm not being facetious. I was able to beat Chun, Blanka, and Zangief on my first tries, but every other fight past that I got stuck on. And I mean literally every single fight. My average runtime through this game is about 40 to 50 minutes, but my route through it with Dhalsim took 2.5 hours. Guile typically takes me 10 to 20 minutes to best, but with Dhalsim, it took me 40 minutes, 24 attempts, and my god, Vega took me an hour on his own. The issue with Dhalsim is that his hitboxes extend alongside his limbs, which is the same way it works with every other character on the cast when they attack. The problem is that his recovery doesn't compensate for the fact that his limbs take longer to get to the enemy, which means every single attack is reactable, which means there was an 80% chance I was going to get hit if I tried to attack. The only attack that was safe was Yoga Fire, and it was the only tool in Dhalsim's kit I had any success with. I even got stuck on Balrog for Christ's sake, and he's the easiest fight in the game next to Dhalsim. Also, Dhalsim has this nasty habit of doing this diving, spinning headbutt thing whenever you're doing a jumping attack, and when I say whenever, I mean it. There were so many times where I would try to do a neutral jumping heavy kick, only to immediately nosedive into a one-way ticket to Pound Town. There are so many times where I just died because I tried to do a jumping attack, and before anyone says anything, I wasn't hitting directional buttons. I thought that might be the case, so I I made sure to move my thumb completely off of the D-pad whenever I started jumping. Maybe it's caused by a proximity to the opponent? Whatever it's caused by, I absolutely hated it. Dhalsim single-handedly made me dislike this game, so I put it down for a week or two and played Sparking Zero and Elden Ring to detox from the cancer that is trying to win a match with this character. This means I likely will be starting Champion Edition with Dhalsim because of how much I hate this character. I do hope he gets buffed or something like that in later revisions of Street Fighter 2 because I am so crazy disappointed with this one. In the end, Dhalsim cost me $35, making him cost over half of what Ryu did, and that's with the buff of not having to restart after spending $5. Fortunately, the next character was much better, or I may not have finished this game. Initially, I was concerned about my playthrough with Zangief. Next to Dhalsim, Zangief is the easiest playable character to beat in the arcade tower, so I was worried I was going to have as much trouble to beat the game with him as I did with Dhalsim. Thankfully, this was not the case, and instead, Zangief became one of my favorites on the cast. I love large hulking grappler-style characters in fighting games, which is the whole reason I put Zangief so high in my personal ranking of initial interest for the characters in this roster. I turned 30 just last week, and if I get arthritis early in my 30s, it is because of trying to do Zangief's SPD, or spinning pile driver. On the PS5 D-pad, this thing is pretty difficult to pull off for someone who hasn't played this game before, and I do wonder if this is easier on an arcade stick or a SNES D-pad, possibly because of my transferable knowledge from other fighting games on how to play this archetype of fighting style. I found interacting with the other characters in this game pretty easy with Zangief, despite his slow speed and bulbous body. Even with that experience, nothing could ever prepare me for Guile charging his spin kick special while just standing. Real talk though, Guile was actually the easiest he's ever been for me. Zangief's jumping heavy kick and heavy punch both lead extremely nicely into a powerful grab, and this is how I defeated essentially every single enemy before Vega. Of the $9.50 Zangief metaphorically cost me, Vega took $6.50 all on his own. It was only by turtling in the corner and baiting out an opportunity to chip him out with a crouching medium kick that I was able to eke out a win. I kept trying to get the SPD to land throughout all of my fights, but I actually couldn't get it to work until Sagat. This is something I want to get better at doing as I play more of these games, because I'd really like to start hit confirming into it. As it stands right now, I was only able to pull it off one time while Sagat was dizzy. The 33% damage or so it dealt really has me salivating at the prospect of being able to do it more reliably. Big damage like that is just intoxicating. After slamming Bison into the dirt out of a jumping heavy kick, Zangief's ending had me rolling. Gorbachev, is that you? What the hell is he doing here? He was still the leader of the USSR when this game dropped, which makes this even more insane. I never thought I'd live to see the day a pixelated version of him was dancing. What are the chances someone does this to Trump, Obama, or some other major world leader within our lifetime? It's just unreal. And with that, my last character awaited, Ken. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is one of my favorite fighters in all of gaming history, and that's the game that made me want to give Street Fighter an honest and real chance. Ken is one of my favorite characters to play in that game, which you can tell from my banner on the channel, as I put many of my favorite gaming characters from the entire chronology of the medium on there. It shouldn't come as any surprise then that Ken cost me the least amount to finish the game, only $7 in less than 40 minutes. I was even able to score a rare perfect win on Vega to finish out my match with him, and I did the same to Bison. Because I'm playing this guideless, I actually can't explain the specific reasons why Ken is better than Ryu, but I also couldn't do that in Smash Ultimate, and I played that game for way longer than this. I've definitely played Ken in that game way more than my entire time with World Warrior. I just seem to be able to dizzy my opponents with crouching light kicks and various other moves much more often with Ken, but how much of this is the result of the character being better or me just improving at the game is hard to tell. I think I will put Ken and Ryu right next to each other in my playthrough lineup on the next game so that I can better juxtapose the design of each character. I kept track of hypothetically how much it would have cost me to play through this game the way they did in the arcades, and my final total is $137.50, which amounts to 31 weeks of scrounging for quarters in the family sofa. That's a solid amount of time to spend on one single game. However, Street Fighter 2 costs $80 on the SNES, which is far less than the amount I would have spent. A SNES cost $90 in 1992, so putting the two together only costs $32.50 more than what I would have spent in the arcades, and it would have come with 2 controllers and a copy of Super Mario Bros. 3. This is why arcades were such a lucrative opportunity for game developers, as I'm sure plenty of kids did spend that much money over the course of a year to play World Warrior in arcades, which makes the value proposition of the SNES for parents even more enticing. I'm going to continue keeping track of how much these arcade games would have cost, because I think it would be sweet to see how much Street Fighter 2 and the series in general would have cost me if I were a kid growing up in the 90s around an arcade. Well, with all 8 characters finished, my time with World Warrior ends, so will it make my top 100 of the 90s? Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior will not be making my top 100 of the 90s, mainly because of Guile and Vega. They pretty much ruined the single player experience. Every other character feels pretty fun to play against, but these two are absolutely abysmal, and I'm not looking forward to continually fighting them in the other Street Fighter 2 games. If the future updates provide the player with more tools to interact with these two enemies specifically, then my major issue with SF2 will be fixed. I do love a hard boss and enemy, but I just want those things to also be fair at the same time. And that's the video, my guys. What do you think of Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior? Is this the best Street Fighter 2 game? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're there, slam that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you'd like to keep up with my Street Fighter journey. I release new gaming videos every single Friday, and next week I'll be dropping my review of Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition. If you like this video, you'll definitely like it. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you for keeping it real with Rayl Deal Games. Have a great day, my friend.